of Judaism. So once again, Guerrilla Hebrew misrepresented his sources. Okay, next is Professor Raphael Falk. And top geneticist, Al-Hazar, Guerrilla Hebrew sings his praises, talks about this as peer-reviewed, not just some internet article. Oh, we'll get to the internet articles in a little while. But peer-reviewed research. How did he represent Professor Falk? Let's listen.
Another problem with DNA. According to Raphael Falk, an Ashkenazi Jew and geneticist who was professor of genetics at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, is he qualified enough for you? There is no Jewish genotype to identify. Also, same guy, Raphael Falk, again, an Ashkenazi Jew who is a geneticist and professor at the Hebrew University. Also, there is no agreed upon criterion to identify Jews, and samples examined for the distribution of biological or molecular markers all depend on the preconceived biases of the investigators. I want everybody to make sure they understand that loud and clear. This is an Ashkenazi Jew who is a geneticist and a professor, and he says these conclusions that are being came to by these Jews that allegedly affirm their identity with DNA are all depend on preconceived biases.
All right, so did he represent Professor Falk accurately? Oh, he quoted those little snippets accurately. Professor Falk is concerned that if you just tie race into biology explicitly and leave it there, that you can have the type of hatred you had in the Holocaust, where Jews as a race were systematically destroyed. But what Guerrilla Hebrew didn't tell you is everything else that Professor Falk said. So he confirmed, this is in the study, I'm going to give you quotes, the importance of the Y chromosome among Ashkenazi and Sephardi priests, Kohanim, pointing to the common Israelite origin of these Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews. This is the point I made repeatedly, underscoring the ancient Israelite origins of my people. I'm going to quote from Professor Falk. Molecular markers were found that indicated common denominators, which were significantly more common among the Y chromosomes, so the paternal chromosomes of the Kohanim, than the Israelites in general. No less important, these denominators were common in Sephardi as well as Ashkenazi Kohanim, also in the Lemba Jews, I can point out. The social and political, also the religious meaning of a biological continuity of we are all Jews, often mentioned or implied, now attained overt corroboration, at least as far as the Kohanim represented a fair sample of Jews. So to say, hey, we're Jews and we know it. Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardi Jews. Yes, this has been confirmed among those who are priests. Yes. Here's what he also said. The apparent achievement of the children of the priest Aaron in maintaining their distinct status over a very long time and across very diverse socio-geographic distance is even more remarkable when juxtaposed with that of the remaining children of the tribe of Levi, the Levites. So the Levites, much more dispersed, much less in common, but those of priestly descent have a high percentage that can say we all go back to a common Middle Eastern ancestor. Obviously, the logic is Aaron in the Bible. Why didn't Guerrilla Hebrew tell you that Professor Falk loudly and clearly, this respected geneticist, Al-Hazar wants you to take this seriously, right? Why didn't he tell you that he confirmed a very important point I made repeatedly in the debate? Oh, but there's something even more important that Professor Falk said. He said this. This is one of my other key points. I said repeatedly that we know we are Jews by our shared history and culture and religion. Here's what Professor Falk wrote in this very same article. Quote, obviously, what kept Jews' identity were the language, culture, tradition, and religion. The very argument I had, the very thing that we've had now for several thousand years unbroken. Thus, whatever their biological heredity kinships, both the transgenerational vertical and intrageneration horizontal relationships are secondary consequences. However, the increasing reliance on scientific reductionism in biological thinking of the last 2 centuries eventually culminated in turning the evidence of DNA sequences into the essence of the characterization of Jewishness rather than its consequence. So in other words, the shared DNA is the consequence of us being a shared people, not our essence, but the consequence of us being one people through history. And how do we know it? We've had common language. We've had common history. We can trace these things back. This is Professor Falk, who Guerrilla Hebrew wants you to listen to. So in Professor Falk's opinion, More important than DNA in determining Jewish identity is the fact that we have a continuous, unbroken history of religious observance and culture, the very thing that Guerrilla Hebrew and the people on the 12 tribes chart do not have. In fact, he said, we know we're the real ones because we don't have that history. That's what he said about people on the chart. Again, I ask, why didn't Guerrilla Hebrew tell you that Professor Falk differed with him and agreed with me? Why withhold such crucial information? And Professor Falk would be the last person to agree with Guerrilla Hebrew that DNA cannot trace things back so far in history. To the contrary, that's his whole field. He simply opposes making race a matter of genes alone. So, on the essential points I was arguing for, Professor Falk affirms them and would be the first to tell you that, say, Native Americans or your average person living in Mexico has no connection to ancient Israel genetically. All right, what about Professor Paul Wexler?